Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, lovely people, depending on where you're watching us from in this beautiful world of ours. This morning for me, evening for you, I have an absolute lovely guest. We just had a bit of a chat behind the scenes. So, Josh actually reached out to me in, let me just, oh, what am I doing? This is interesting. Okay, so I had a bit of delay, sorry, in the volume here. Joshua reached out to me a couple of months ago and he came across me through the lovely Ethan Getchell. I said, we have to give him a shout out here. Do you want to share that story, Josh, before you introduce yourself, or introduce yourself first? Over to you.
Sure. Yeah. I'll fill the time. So I know Ethan a little bit, and he's a lovely guy, and he's building a social work practice as a young man. I think he's in grad school, and
Mm.
and we're like LinkedIn pals and all that. And I saw that he had been on your show, Marie, and I was really moved. I was really touched. I was like, this.
Yeah,
Not only does he have
so was
something to
I.
say, but Marie
Yeah.
has something to say, and this audience, seems really interesting. And then I dug
Mm.
into some of the other episodes, and I was like, man, I think I can contribute and be helpful to perhaps this audience. So here we
And I'm
are.
so happy you're here. So let's just get into it. Can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Josh or Joshua Rivedal from the States, from the United States. I live in Philadelphia, which is kind of smack in the middle of New York City and Washington, D.C. I'm in Toronto today presenting on mental health and suicide prevention at a couple of college campuses. Yeah, my background is creative, right? So initially,
Mm.
playwright, actor. That's where it kind of all started in New York City, age 19. It's about 21
Mm.
years ago. Geez, Louise. Hard to say that.
Okay.
Yeah. So we said it before. Where's the blur my face option on this thing? Get the background, working on the face. Anyway, so so that was my original background. Grew up in
Mm.
New Jersey, which is just south of New York City.
Mm.
Grew up in a very faith-based culture, and
Mm.
just kind of like the way that I grew up, and there's nothing wrong with that, but kind of like my family unit and where I grew up, like we didn't talk about grief, we didn't talk about change, we didn't talk
Mm.
about mental health. So I didn't have that really in my lexicon growing up, and even to my
Yeah.
early and mid 20s. So this background, has been really, really helpful in terms of storytelling, playwriting, et cetera. And I was working and going on tour and singing and all that stuff.
Mm.
And
You
um,
sing. I didn't know that
I
about you.
do. Yes,
Ooh.
I do, but I'm not going to do any more
Oh.
than that. Yeah. And so when I turned 25, my parents broke up, and it
Mm.
wasn't the greatest relationship. And my dad, didn't take that really well. And 6 months after they started going through that process, he died by suicide.
Mm.
There's a history of this in my family, and I found that out in secret from my mother, whose parent that was not. It was my dad's dad who had died by
Yeah.
suicide in the 1960s. Um,
Oh my
you know,
goodness.
long story short, so like, this happened when I was 25. Couple years pass, and I'm not talking, I'm not grieving, I'm not,
Mm.
under any understanding of change and change management and rituals and routines and things that can help you in that journey. And so I was retreating further into myself because that was a learned coping skill. That was the way that I learned to
Yeah.
be, and it served me well as a little person, but it did not serve me well as an adult. Right? I outgrew that coping skill, and it became unhealthy for me. And so I wasn't talking, wasn't grieving, but I did do some things that were positive during that period of time.
Mm.
One man play, because I think that's what you do when you're sad and angsty. But it was. I play 16 characters in it. I sing in it a little bit as well.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness. I
it's
want to watch that.
so what it
Please
is.
send me the link. I really want to watch
I,
this.
I have some old links for sure, and it's
Yeah.
it's a play, right? And
Mm.
I did it in New York City. I did it outside of Philadelphia. It did really
Yeah.
well, views, etc. And really, what it is, it was either an hour, and then I expanded it to 75 minutes. And it was an embellished story of my life. Sort of, I'm the protagonist, and in a sense, my dad is the antagonist. And at the end is I'm talking about his death by suicide and how it affected me.
Mm.
And it was really, really challenging to do that. And so like that was sort of a way to talk, but not really talk. Like I was kind of in control of the
Yeah.
message,
Amazing.
but without really dealing with it,
Mm.
there were certain things that I did learn like through that process though, like in class, like I was in a class that developed it. So I had to empathize with my dad to be able to play him on stage, because I played him,
Mm.
my mom, I played
Yeah.
myself, I played different other characters. And so to create a character and then act that character out, you need to empathize with them on some level, at least on
Yeah.
some piece of their
Yeah.
humanity. So like I got that piece, and that was kind of integral for grieving and mourning, but not in sort of an intentional way. And so but beyond that, still retreating further into myself. Like so that project is on hiatus. It's now the end of 2010 into 2011, you know, and I hadn't dealt with any of my issues or problems or trauma or et
Mm.
cetera, and and the various things that I lost, during that, my parents, some relationships during that time, et cetera. Like, because we're talking about grief. Grief doesn't just happen with a death.
Mm.
Not to make a sort of a
No, no, no.
comparison,
I'm glad you say that. Absolutely. It's not
but
about
we can
comparison.
grieve.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we can grieve. And I heard it was cool because I watched your intro video and you were talking about kind of, you didn't say it quite like this, but it was comparison Olympics sometimes when we get into talking about grief.
Comparison battle at its finest. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
heard that too. And it's like, this is not healthy. It's not like, it's not like who's
Yeah.
more sad and who's,
Yeah.
has
Comparison doesn't help us heal. Absolutely. Yeah.
doesn't. Right.
Mm.
So I was, yeah, so I had like now I had all this time in the beginning of 2011
Mm.
to really think and to deal, but not really deal with the stuff that was going on, and it bowled me over because I had no context on how to deal with it. So like,
Mm.
you know, again, all these major changes, trauma, loss, right? So I was, but I had to mourn the loss of some relationships. I had to mourn the
Yeah.
loss of like a couple of years of my life, like not really going the
Mm.
way that I wanted to. I didn't know all this, but I needed to
Mm.
do, if I was aware of it, I would have been able to do that.
Yeah.
Um, nevertheless, the beginning of 2011 didn't really have any projects on the docket, and it was the new year, and like everything kind of just fell apart. Like my physical hygiene, my
Mm.
mental hygiene, it went kind of quick.
Mm.
To the point where like 7 weeks later, a little bit before my 27th birthday, I was ready to, I mean, like it was progressing where I was thinking about suicide, like weekly, daily, hourly, to the point where like the middle of February, I was like ready to go. Not because I
Yeah.
wanted to, but because I didn't understand what to do next. I was like,
Mm.
I see
Wow.
black
Wow. Can we just pause this? This
Yeah,
this is really like this is such an important point that I want to highlight what you just said. Not because I wanted to, but I didn't know where else to go or what else to do. That
yeah,
is incredible. I think I wanted to highlight that for some people watching this here that might go like, oh, okay. So it's not always like I want to, I'm over it, I'm done. I love that you share this. This is really important. Sorry, I just had to pause and
fine.
highlight that.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, thank you for that. Because actually, I'll build on what you just said, and then we'll get back to it. But just
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah, sure.
nobody wants to die, and I say that for emphasis. That's
Mm.
why I repeat myself. Nobody wants to die, right? It's about a perceived or real lack of resource and a sense of hopelessness, right? And
Wow.
those compounds upon itself. And then as well, when you're in that space, what you're going to hear a lot of people say is, "I'm a burden." Right? Are they? No, of course not. But that's
Mm.
how we feel
Yeah,
because it's this
yeah.
physiological thing inside of our bodies that we're born with to reciprocate
Mm.
authentically with one another in deep, meaningful
Mm.
relationships. We need to have it. It's
Correct.
not nice to have. We have to have it. And when
We
somebody
have to
feels
have
like
it.
a
Yeah.
burden, their reciprocity is out of balance, right? They're like, all I'm doing is taking
Wow.
and taking and taking and not giving. And so
Yeah.
it's gonna be a little bit challenging, right? So
Mm.
side note, I'm getting ahead of myself, but this is one of my coping skills is to be constantly not at the expense of my mental well-being, but to constantly somehow be in the service of others so that when that learned behavior in the back of my head says you don't deserve help, the new learned behavior takes over. It's like, man, I volunteered for that thing and I helped my friend, and like, you're gonna go get some help today, Josh. So that's how that
Pep
works in my
talk.
head
Yeah.
now. Um,
I have like a billion things in my head now where we could take this conversation, and I wish we had like 3 hours and I would explore all of them. I already know that I will have to have you back on the podcast, and we haven't even we're not even halfway there yet. But there's so many topics that come up for me, and one of them being epigenetics, a topic that I've really delved quite deeply into lately. And actually, I would like to go there for a minute.
So
Are you familiar with epigenetics?
I would not say I'm an expert in it, but I've worked on a book for somebody
Neither am I.
recently that
Yeah,
I got a really good peer-reviewed education, at
yeah,
least of some of
yeah.
the like abstracts and stuff. So
I
it's a
am
really fascinating field. I'd love to
absolutely,
hear your take on it.
exactly. I'm absolutely not an expert in it, but that topic seemed to be resurfacing more and more for me over the last few years. And then one of my previous clients, she was in a group setting in one of the programs, in the healing programs I ran in Loving Love After Loss. And she reached out to me and booked a family bereavement session with me. She brought her entire family to meet me for coffee, and we're going to have the session actually in 2 weeks' time. And as we are having this, coffee catch up to meet her family in person, I had a chat to her and she said, "You need to read this book, Marie. I think you will love it." Her husband and her just got into it, and it's called, I think, oh, I wasn't prepared to talk about this, so otherwise I would have looked up the title, but I think It Doesn't Start With You. And it's such a cool book, and it's like the topic of epigenetic comes up a lot. And for me, it was really fascinating because what you just said about your grandfather, your father, and then you going through that, it sparked that for me. And I have a rather similar but completely different story, if that makes sense. My dad's dad died rather young from a heart failure that wasn't discovered back then because medicine was just way not as advanced. My dad passed really early from cancer. He was 46. My husband died when he was 45. I've got two sons. You can only imagine how much I want to get into this and heal this. So I'm thinking, this, I know this goes very deep and rather personal for me. And I said, when it comes to my sons, I want to protect them. I don't want to really talk about it too openly, but this is something that I feel that audience needs to hear about. Some of you might be sitting there listening to this right now going like, oh my God, I have never seen, that going through my family. I'm actually having goosebumps as I say this. And so anybody interested in that, I would really, really strongly recommend you have a look at that book. I really want to give a shout out to the book. It Didn't Start With You. I'm quite certain that that was the title. That is the title. And also to look into family constellation, because what you just said, and Hellinger, the father of family constellation, he's actually also mentioned in that book. It's all about that belonging. It's not that we want to, we need to. We have the deep human need of belonging, because if we don't, going back to absolute basics, those who leave the pack, there's a question of survival. They usually don't survive. So we have that ingrained need of belonging, of being part of a pack, being part of a family. So when something like that happens, what you just shared, it has a huge, huge impact and ripple effect throughout the entire family system. So I just needed to share this here, and I'd really like to take the conversation back to your story. How do you see this playing out in your family, epigenetics, and what can we do to actually heal that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, to very oversimplify my understanding of epigenetics for
Yeah.
everyone, for me too, to hear it out loud, is it's sort of like we hear things like it's nature or nurture, but it's not, it's both,
Mm,
right? So,
mm,
like,
yeah.
there are some things in our family histories that can be challenging, difficult patterns to break.
Mm,
But the nice thing is that we can break them. Like it's
hmm.
not our destiny, right?
Yes.
So, I think in that sense, I couldn't say for 100% certainty that epigenetics played out in the sense that my father died and then because his
Mm,
father died. I don't know in
mm,
terms of like where their lineage started
mm.
goes
Yeah.
beyond, but I do know that in terms of my family, um, I think, and I can't like that's their story and not mine, but I do see us healing to the level individually that we're able to. And then I also see us healing collectively to the ability that
Mm,
we're collectively able to, like, in a sense, like, there's a couple years ago, but I'm going to be honest, my dad was abusive. Like, he was emotionally
mm,
abusive and at times physically abusive. Um,
mm,
and, um, you know, we as kids a couple of years ago first said that the A word, like we were all together for like the first time in a long time at a Thanksgiving dinner or something like together,
Mm,
and we said it and we talked about it, and we talked about it a few times. We don't go into it a lot lately, but like it
mm,
was to be able to say that and then to see, like, I don't have kids, but to see my siblings raising their babies in a very even-handed, generous, kind, firm,
mm,
without using hands and without calling names,
mm, mm.
that's lovely, right? So that's breaking cycles. Like,
Yeah,
I'm not dead. Like, that's breaking a cycle. And not
yeah,
just not dead, I'm thriving, you know, and we're
yeah,
making sure the babies in our family are thriving. And
yeah.
so when I saw them for the first time, when they were little, little, little people, you know, just whispering all the things
Mm,
that they needed to hear from a support system
mm.
to them. They couldn't understand. They didn't speak English, right?
Yeah,
But they were they were next to my
yeah.
heart, you know, and I was
They
able
feel
to
it.
these
Yeah.
things, and I show up consistently for that when I'm able to
Mm,
see them. And so even to
yeah,
the point where like modeling what healthy coping looks like,
yeah.
modeling what talking about things looks like. 4 or 5 years ago, my eldest niece, who's like 8 and change now, like 8.5,
Hmm.
she asked about her grandfather, my dad, in front of
Hmm.
everybody, and I think she was the
Hmm.
only one. She was the eldest and the only one who could talk at the time, and she
Mm.
wanted to know what happened to Grandpa. And that's a challenging thing. Like, we can have
Yeah,
conversations about mourning, loss, suicide, etc., with
yeah,
young people, you
yeah,
know, younger than even 12. But in the language that she could understand, I was the one that spoke up and I said,
exactly.
Grandpa passed away because his brain was sick. And that's true. His
Mm.
brain was sick. I
Yeah,
didn't get into all the suicide, etc. We'll fill her
yeah.
in, you know,
And we don't need
appropriately
to.
as we
Yeah,
move on.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I love how you approach this, and I absolutely agree. There's epigenetics, and there are things, obviously showing up, rearing its ugly head, rearing its unhealed patterns, really, I should say. But there is also the breaking those patterns. And I think it all starts with awareness. We are aware of something that was not good for us, that didn't feel right, that didn't feel healthy or nurturing or loving. So in the awareness lies the opportunity to change it, to do things differently. And it's beautiful to see that is happening in your family. I think the reason why I sort of tapped on the topic of epigenetics is because it's very fresh to me, and it just really triggered it when you
mm,
said that in a positive way. It's like, wow, wow, wow. There's a reason why, you start reading something, you start delving into something, and then all of a sudden it is reflected back to you everywhere where you go, and in other people's stories as well. And I think the biggest thing is to, again, be aware of it and then know what to do with it in case it does show up in the next generation. I think as soon as we have the awareness, we also have the responsibility to heal it and to change it for ourselves, for our previous and for our future generations to come. And I can see that in you. So I'm really, really happy that you're here to talk about that. And with that being said, I'd love to delve a little bit into, how do you show up today? What do you do? Because you're very much on the prevention. Let's talk about this side of things. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that journey and how you got into that, how you got started.
yeah, sure. So I recognized early on as I started to heal from my trauma and crisis, which is like about it was early 2011. I nearly attempted, got help, nearly attempted
Mm,
suicide, got help. And from that place, I started to recognize like I was really like building from the bottom up. Like I was like learning how to metaphorically walk again in a sense, right? And so like
mm,
I
yeah.
recognized that like when I was helping there was this elderly woman in my building in New York City, and every time I helped her with the door, with her groceries, I felt a little more buoyant in the
Mm,
world and okay with life, and it was helping me heal and grow in those small moments. And it was like 10, 15 minutes. So then I was like, man, I got to keep doing this. And as I was
mm,
healing and growing, I also started to dig into stuff about what happened to me, what happened to my dad, my family, and I started to see numbers and statistics, and there was like 47,000 in the U.S. alone
mm.
die by suicide each year. Those
Wow.
stats, the proportion to population holds roughly the same in Canada, the US, and the UK, give or take,
Yeah.
maybe percentage points. About 1.5 million in the US. We have about, I'm blanking, but it's about 375 million, something like that. It keeps, I don't know, it
Mm.
keeps changing.
Yeah, it does, doesn't
It
it?
keeps changing.
Oh.
So roughly that amount attempt every year suicide. And that's a
Mm.
lot of people. Both of those is a lot of
Yeah.
people. And I was like, okay, I thought I was the only one going through this.
Mm.
Let's go. And I
Yeah.
remember that I had this story, this one man play, and what was happening after this one man play, before I was in crisis, there were like survivors of suicide loss coming to me after my play, where I was like, I'm just trying to do theater, in my head, but I was cool to
Mm.
these people afterwards, but they were like, thanks for talking about this. It's been 30 years, 10
Mm.
years, 15 years. We never talked about it. Thank you for
Yeah.
talking about it. And I was like, so then
Wow.
after this crisis, I was like, I could condense this play,
Hmm.
get trained, learn, get supervised,
Mm.
play, keynote, Q&A. And I was like, let's start with college. There's a lot of those universities, colleges in the US. It's a great age. It was closer to my age than it is now. So then I did that. I pitched the idea and like nobody really knew what I was trying to do. And then somebody was like, yes, we'll do it. Did it at a
Mm.
university in the US, like right around the corner from me. A young man waited till everyone left, talked to me afterwards, was super like sheepish, but was like, I've been depressed for as
Mm.
long as I remember. I've been suicidal for like a month. I thought these were normal. I know it's not now. And I watched him
Oh,
walk to the counseling office. And I was like, man, I got to keep doing this, And so
yes. Oh, wow. Wow, wow,
I
wow.
started, yeah. So I mean, that was like, if I had to go through all this, and I didn't have to go through this to help this young man, but at the time, my thought was, if I had to go through all
Mm.
this to help this one guy, I got
Oh,
to keep going. I got to keep going.
incredible.
And
Yeah.
so I just started reaching out, and then people started reaching out to me, and I started volunteering, right? And I was like, okay, like let me play around in this space a little bit more. How do we, it can't like so I was definitely into the prevention side, like signs and symptoms and how and where to get help
Mm.
and intervention and what that conversation looks like and a bit of my story. But then almost really quickly, I started to realize that my story was having an effect on people, but I wasn't quite sure
Mm.
why. And so then I
Mm.
started to study storytelling and what it does
Yeah.
scientifically to the brain and things like that.
Love,
And I
love,
was like,
love that.
boom.
Yeah.
And then people
Yeah.
started telling me their story. And then I was like, all right, well, then, let me share your story because not everybody has a marketing platform. Not everybody kind of
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
some of the
Yeah.
things that I knew how to do. So I started sharing their stories. And then I turned it into books,
Mm.
and so there was grief in there. There was,
Yeah.
longing, learning,
Yeah.
growing,
Yeah.
a trans man finding love for the first time, second acts and second chances. And so, all right, stories
Love,
are going to
love,
be the
love it.
thing that save us. Right. And then I started
Yeah.
volunteering in some grief spaces, like for survivors of loss, right? And sort of paying
Yeah.
attention to that. Started talking at like walks, like hope walks and things like that.
Oh, beautiful.
Anywhere where I can show up and have this conversation around mental
Mm.
health, around loss, change management ties into that. So I use some of this into the corporate world now where I'm talking about
Oh,
change management and I
beautiful.
can
I love
tie to
it.
the
Love,
grief.
love, love it. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
have to, but I can tie to the grief, which is really
Oh,
nice. Humanizes the
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
We don't talk about grief enough, and we don't talk about it in a healthy way. And I'm on this path now to bring my story and my teaching into the corporate space. And I love that you do that. Are you familiar with Lisa Sugarman? Do you know of her, or do you know her?
I'm not sure if I do.
No, no,
It
that's
doesn't
fine.
sound
I've
familiar.
had her on my podcast as well, and I'm just asking because of the Hope walks and talks, and she just started that as well, and she said you need to start that in Sydney, Marie, and I love when people start things like that because we all need it. And I want to take you back a little bit to
Yeah.
storytelling. Do you mind giving a bit of a wrap up because you touched on the psychology of it and what it does? Because I'm such a huge fan of storytelling because with storytelling is how we connect. It goes back to the again ancient times where we sat around the fire and share our
Right.
stories. Can you share a little bit about the psychology of storytelling, just in a nutshell?
Yeah. When we are listening to someone talk about it, with like a metaphor or a simile, like our
Mm.
brains really do a lot with that. Like the brain lights up
Mm.
there, and the brain lights up around a good story, right? And
Yeah.
so there's a thing called insula in the brain that lights up. And so what this does is really cool. So like it'll if we're that engaged into a story, like the brain is going to start doing inside it's going to start doing what it would do if it was doing the actual action being talked about. So like if you're gonna
Mm,
if somebody's talking about kicking a ball in a very descriptive way, your
yeah.
brain is lighting up as if it were kicking a ball in real life,
Hmm.
which to me, and which is why I dig into, well, talking about help leads to getting help, talking about hope leads to
Mm,
getting hope. We can flip it into the negative too. We don't need to go there,
yeah.
right? Let's keep it toward the like using this storytelling connection to like leverage some
Mm,
positivity, from the
yeah.
audience, whether it's one or more than one. Yeah. So that's like in a nutshell what
Yeah.
storytelling can really do on a scientific level.
I love
Yeah.
that. And I love the ripple effect that storytelling always has, and also what you said before. Again, I want to take my highlighter out and highlight what you
Yeah.
said there before. It's oh, I'm not alone in this. That is huge, 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 huge. Because I remember I was 20 when my dad passed away, and I honestly felt I was the only person in the whole wide world who just lost her dad. Of course, my brain knew I couldn't be the only one, but this is how I felt. I really felt I was alone in this because I felt I had nobody I could talk to about this. B, I felt that nobody could understand. So, you know, I just felt completely alone in this. I didn't know how to handle grief. I didn't know how to do grief. I didn't know how to heal, who to reach out for, how to get help. It took a good year before I could dig myself out of this hole, basically, and go like, you know what, I need to do something about it. And it all got triggered by a book that a friend of mine handed me, and I thanked her 1,000 times over since. And I said, this really, I feel, saved my life. Like, I don't know if it was in a complete physical sense or in an emotional sense, but it did save my life. I did go to therapy. I did start healing childhood wounds, and as we know, that's quite a journey. So I've been on this journey for a long time, and then delved into doing this myself. And as I was delving into the self-development world, 7.5 years into it, my husband suddenly passed. So I was completely differently equipped at that stage, which I talk about as a hidden gift in adversity. And that just was the catalyst to everything I do now. So seeing my husband's death as a catalyst rather than the most tragic thing in our lives has also shifted a lot for me and has then created this huge ripple effect that now evolves having incredible guests on like you. So I'm really, really happy how when we start looking at things differently, how those things that we have experienced can change and we're allowed to experience that in a positive way, in a healing sort of way. Um, Never gonna say my husband's death is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I can't and don't want to see it as such, but I do see the effect that it had on so many other people, including our own sons, like watching them grow up as emotionally mature men, incredible. And
Yeah.
I love that you are standing on stage and sharing something that goes so deep where you felt you were so alone in this and now giving so many other people hope, including your nephews and nieces. And I'm absolutely certain that if it affects your entire circle of friends and family, and then it ripples out, that comes back to we are all in this collective healing, collective being, and that oneness that, back to epigenetics, whatever, it doesn't matter where we start, as long as we find that one person that we feel drawn to, whose story we can connect with, and then take the next step. So,
Yeah.
what would be the next step for people listening to this if they want to reach out to you?
Oh, yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram.
Hmm.
You can email me, Josh at iampossible, M is in Mary, Josh at
Hmm.
iampossibleproject.com. I'm on Facebook. You might not be able to find me on Facebook, but you can find me on the rest. I'm all over, not all over the internet, but like if you Google me, like you should be able to find me.
Yeah.
My website, there's a forum that it'll go straight to me. So like reach out. I'm happy to be a support.
Mm.
I'm not a crisis person, so it's not going to be like he's going to get back to you in 3 hours or in 15
Yeah.
minutes, but I'm pretty responsive. So like I'm easy to
Yeah.
get in touch with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're definitely available for speaking, workshops, etc., just to be there.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Speaking workshops. I
Do you
sometimes.
do a little bit of stand up as well? Did I see that on YouTube?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
So I,
fairly certain I came across a clip where it was hilarious, and I'm like, oh my God, he does
oh,
stand up as well.
Yeah, so that's at the moment like books and stand up are my intersection with arts and intersection with this. So like often but not always, like more like on the corporate side and or like at these colleges I was speaking at and will be tomorrow. If it's a 60-minute
Mm,
event, I'll do like 10 to 15 minutes to stand up on the front end. It's not
awesome.
naughty. Like, you can't do the naughty stuff at like in those environments, so like don't worry. But
Yeah.
like it's just silly stuff. It's like me, like I'm
Yeah.
40 and I'm aging and like so it's stuff.
Yeah.
It's not mental health, it's not suicide, it's not grief, but it's like just getting to know me and just me as
Yeah.
me.
Lightness and connection. Absolutely. I
Yeah,
love that. I am so happy that we connected, Josh. Thank you so much for
true.
reaching out to me. We will definitely be sharing a lot of links in the show notes so people can, find you, connect with you, follow you. And I'm already certain that I would love to have you back on this podcast and we share some more because I feel we haven't even scratched the surface yet. So
Yeah.
thank you
I
for
think we had
opening up
another at
this
least another
topic.
half an hour conversation, so I'm
Yeah.
down.
Oh,
You know.
at least. Yeah. Absolutely. I really want to have you back in season six, which is starting in January 2025. So we'll definitely have Josh back in season six to share a little bit more because I think it's such an important topic to talk about. And yeah, would you like to wrap us up? If there's anything, if there's one thing that you would want people to get away from this, listening to our conversation today, what would that be?
Um, we have two things, and I'll try to be brief. Two things. We
No,
all
that's great.
have the opportunity to make meaning and tell a story 100 different ways about anything that we
Mm,
go through, right? And
mm,
if it's a challenging piece, like we don't negate that, but there can be, it doesn't have to be, but there can be something else that we pull from it, right? Like, so my
mm.
dad, like, I don't know why he passed. Like, that's not for me to
Yeah,
know necessarily, but,
yeah.
and it's painful and that can be true. But what can also be true over here is that I can use that as an experience to grow and heal for myself and help others. So, like, we have an opportunity to reframe a situation as being the worst thing or the most shameful thing, and we could take it and
Mm,
flip it on its head. We can do that. We have that opportunity. The other thing I want to say is that we're all doing the best we can with the information that we have at any given point. Nobody ever wakes
mm.
up in the morning and is like, I can't wait to not give my son or daughter the resources they need for the rest of their life. I can't wait to procrastinate on everything.
Yeah.
Nobody does that, right? So
Mm,
grace for yourself, grace for others, and
nice.
it builds bridges. And it's just, I think that'll be, if we're talking grief, that it's going to help us on that journey. It's going to help us as we make mistakes and stumble, and it's going to help us,
Love
as
that.
we connect with others. So yes,
Yeah, absolutely love that. Grace for
I
ourselves.
got.
It's such a beautiful wrap up. Thank you so much, Josh, for being here. And everybody, if you find meaning in this, if you find yourself and you think somebody else can get something out of this, please feel free to share this podcast. And of course, subscribe for our weekly episodes of Unsilence Grief. Thank you so much for being here. This is Josh and Marie signing off. Bye for now.